Good morning, it's Tuesday, May 26, and this is the Brussels Playbook Podcast. The vibe in Brussels today is sweaty, literally and figuratively, as EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen and Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius touched down in Lithuania to show support for the Baltics following last week's drone scare. And also on the pod, should Europe have an envoy in the Russia-Ukraine peace talks? Some are saying no, some are saying yes. Nick and I break it down. And negotiations on the EU's next long-term budget are ramping up, but loads of countries are unhappy with the 1.8 trillion euro price tag. I'm Zoya and with me today is Nick Vineker, our Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent. Hey Nick, how are you dealing with this heat dome?
I'm doing pretty well, although someone commented on my shorts saying I'm wearing very short shorts. So
It was me. I was the someone. I did say sun's out, knees out.
I was the second person then. Someone said, whoa, really short shorts. But I'm feeling pretty good about them.
Yeah, you're doing the short shorts. I'm doing the ice cream. In fact, I'm doing ice in everything. Iced tea, ice cream, ice water all day. All right, let's get to something that's a little less icy, a little more hot. Last week on the pod, we spoke about the fact that drones have been violating Baltic airspace, and we know that Lithuania's president and prime minister were rushed to underground bunkers, and there were some residents who were urged to take shelter. Well, today, the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the Defence Commissioner Andrius Kubilius, they're off to Lithuania for a meeting with the prime minister and with other Baltic leaders.
Yeah, so the aim is to show solidarity with the Baltic states, but also to talk about shared defense capabilities and the EU's safe loans. But there's more.
Yep, there is, because this was a big topic. You and I were both in Prague last week at the Globsec conference, and basically this was the talk of the forum. There were panels and politicians talking about the threat from drones spilling over into EU airspace. And in fact, you and I both spoke with some people who told us separately that there have been some discussions between Baltic companies and Ukrainian firms about bomb shelter purchases and bomb shelter expertise.
Yeah, so these are big Ukrainian firms that have been doing this on an industrial scale, if I may. And they said, well, we've been having these exploratory talks with our Baltic counterparts about bringing our know-how to the Baltic states. So these are companies that make bomb shelters for the front line, kind of set them up quickly, and suddenly there's a surge in interest.
Yeah, and I was speaking with Ihor Fedirko. He's the chief of one of Ukraine's leading defense industry groups. And he was telling me that basically you need to be really, really quick if there's a spillover effect or if there's a new incursion. You've got to be quick in protecting people because the Baltics are quite small and they've got, it's a pretty easy target, shall we say. Although it's not that easy because the Baltics have been shooting down these drones in some cases. They've been bolstering their defenses. There's been all sorts of work being done. But the point is that he was saying they also want to make sure that they can protect their people in the event of an incursion that's serious and targeted at the Baltics.
Yeah, and the government officials from those countries insist that, their countries are ready and they've been working on readiness. But what these CEOs have told us is that there's specific know-how in building shelters on work sites, construction sites, near industrial sites where workers can kind of rush in. Some of them are above ground, in fact, and it's really all about protecting people from the shrapnel from drones or missile strikes, where sometimes you don't have the time to go into an underground shelter. They're just kind of more stopgap solutions.
Yeah. So we have had this kind of interest happening for a while now. I know that even in just the early stages of the war, I know one of our colleagues, Aitor, he was doing some reporting and found that some listings in Vilnius that had basements or fortified underground spaces were being marketed as potential shelters. So I think this isn't a new threat, but certainly I think this latest incursion series has increased the kind of urgency there. But that's not the only kind of preparation that we're seeing either. Our colleague Eleanor Reagan, she has reported on Estonia's digital embassy.
Yeah, so this is an interesting idea. The digital embassy is basically a hidden digital vault in Luxembourg where Estonia has put a lot of its security databases, population registers, land ownership records, the sort of thing that you need to keep a state going effectively in the event of a major cyber attack or something worse.
Yeah, exactly. And she was saying in her story that's out this morning that it's essentially like a giant USB stick loaded with the blueprint and vital data to rebuild an entire state. So it's super interesting. And the various measures to protect it are quite interesting as well. So it's treated like a real diplomatic embassy. So even Luxembourg, which is hosting it, their officials can't enter without permission.
Exactly. The system is built on the data, so it can't be remotely deleted. And even if Estonia was invaded, the invaders could not get rid of the data. So it's like a sort of DNA sample of the country outside. We're really working on the metaphors and analogies here.
Yeah, we really are. Well, other countries have apparently also been following suit. So Monaco has a digital embassy agreement with Luxembourg, which was formed in 2021. And Ukraine has actually been studying the Estonian example and making moves in that direction as well. So it's super interesting. You know, Europe and Ukraine are learning from each other. The Baltics are learning from Ukraine's shelters. Ukraine is learning from Estonia's digital embassy. So it's all what comes around goes around. Nick, that leads us to our second story now. You and I, again, when we were in Prague, started picking up some interesting developments in this conversation around whether Europe needs to have an envoy to sit at the table when peace talks are happening between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one where it was really on a lot of panels ever since the U.S. has stepped back from these talks. And we saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio kind of suggest that the U.S. was putting its participation on pause. There have been more and more calls for Europeans to name a special envoy for these talks. And we've had a flurry of names. We had a first batch we reported on a couple of weeks ago. Former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, former ECB President Mario Draghi, but now even some more names are coming to the fore.
Who did you hear mentioned?
So one that's come up a lot is Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council.
Oh, that's interesting.
Kind of a neutral player, but I've also heard Sauli Niinisto, the former Finnish president, who did kind of play that role with Russia when he was in power. And somebody even mentioned to me Jean-Claude Juncker, the former president of the European Commission. I don't know what he's up to these days.
Well, I think he's still in the Berlaymont. I think he still has an office there, probably playing pinball machines in the basement and rattling around upstairs. Well, Nick, that's interesting because there was also a pushback to this idea because I actually put that question and you put that question to a bunch of the people who we interviewed. And for me, I asked Radosław Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, what he thought about this idea of an envoy. And he was really thinking that this still was not a good idea. He said, look, yes, there is this conversation around this happening, but it's actually better to let Ukraine and Russia have those peace talks directly. We don't really need an envoy. This is a question for the two of them. Let's have a listen to what he said.
It is actually quite tempting to say, well, maybe Europe should negotiate it. But I think we should be careful with this. We don't want to be seen by Ukraine as people who put pressure on them to make compromises. We should stick to our principles that we will support Ukraine, whatever they decide is good for them. And remember, Ukraine and Russia have been negotiating through back channels all along. They had these various paths. The only one that's been workable and has brought results so far over the 4 years is the one devoted to mutual exchanges of prisoners. But initially they had these other paths of negotiations. So if Putin is serious, he can reopen them.
Yeah, super interesting, Nick. Basically, he's saying, look, just let the two of them talk it out. But you also spoke with the Lithuanian foreign minister.
Yeah, really interesting. And we're hearing kind of a similar thing from Kęstutis Budrys, Lithuania's foreign minister, also at Glavsec. Let's hear what he had to say.
What will be our package? What will be our demands?
Right.
What it will be all about? So can we agree on this list of demands? And can we then be transparent enough among the member states to agree that this is the way forward? How we will define the end state? What will be our indicators of success that we are successful? Then we can proceed forward. But when we don't have this essential part, fundamental part, and we are discussing the names, I feel that we are falling into the trap of Russia. Because that came from Russia. Those first ideas about Gerhard Schroeder, that's the potential candidate for this negotiation, that didn't come out from any capital of Europe. That came from Moscow.
Yeah, so it's also an argument we heard from the Estonian foreign minister who said, well, Putin could use these direct talks to sort of delay further sanctions and so on. You could say, well, you could argue it the other way and say you could use the talks to make threats of further sanctions. But in any case, it's going to be on the table, the question of direct talks with Russia at informal talks with EU foreign ministers later this week, presided over by Kaja Kallas. So we will see if, Europe can rally behind one idea or not. I got to say, the room was kind of 50-50. I heard a lot of calls in favor of this in Globsec.
Including, so you did an interview with Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who said he'd gone the other way. He had thought previously that we shouldn't have an envoy, and now he thought maybe we should have one. Yeah. So it was really a 50-50 situation.
Yeah, and Anders Fogh Rasmussen, not exactly a dove on Russia. So
former NATO chief and quite active on this one.
Of course.
All right, Nick, let's go from that to the MFF in MFF.
Woohoo!
It's the EU's next long-term budget. It runs from 2028 to 2034, and the Commission has put up a proposal wanting 1.8 trillion with a T, for that 7-year period.
Trillion.
Yeah.
But there's a spanner in the works.
Yeah, go on.
Because the EU's wealthy countries, or its net contributor countries...
That's where the ones that pay more into the EU budget than take out of the EU budget.
Mm-hmm. They're fed up and they want a lower overall number. And the countries are Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Austria, Netherlands. Those are some of the usual suspects.
Yeah, so far so boring.
Right, frugal countries. But also, this time, our reporting shows that Germany and France, the EU's two biggest countries, are also going to be in the room, which really gives them a lot more heft and sets this up as a big fight, actually.
Yeah, and when you say in the room, this is in the breakfast room this morning, because these countries are catching up over breakfast ahead of this General Affairs Council that'll happen later today, which is where various EU affairs ministers meet and discuss various things. One of those things is the budget. They're having breakfast and they're going to be talking frugalism.
Plotting and aligning their strategy on how to tell the Commission that we just simply won't sign on to a budget this big. You gotta make it smaller.
Dial it down. And this is really significant because basically what's happening right now is all of the countries are coming together and deciding what amount they want to put into this budget proposal ahead of the detailed breakdown of the proposed budgets. That's called the nego box. Mm-hmm. And that's basically concrete numbers, spending allocations. That is due to be circulated in early June. And then there's going to be a European Council summit with all EU leaders on June 18 where they're going to discuss it for real, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we can expect the deal to go down to the wire when the current MFF expires.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to seeing what they had for breakfast. If it's going to be bougie and delicious or frugal.
It's going to be dry oats.
Hard-boiled egg.
With salt and water.
Right, Nick, before we go and put ourselves in an ice bath for the rest of the morning, I want to tell you I've received a handwritten letter, no less.
Aww.
It was the sweetest thing. Stephen from the UK wrote in after my call out saying that no one writes letters anymore, Nick, and he was saying, why do we ask people to send us WhatsApps? Well, folks, if you want to send me a letter, go ahead.
You know the way to Zoya's heart.
Sadly, the WhatsApp link to my mailbox is not in the show notes, but you can certainly leave us a note. Tell us what you think about the MFF. Do you think Europe should be spending more money, less money? What do you reckon?
More Bitcoin.
That's not all, Nick. Actually, you know how we have a little informal competition with our Berlin Playbook Podcast colleagues who have sadly got still more reviews than we do?
It's mostly friendly.
Yeah, it is mostly friendly. Well, now we've got another podcast to be mostly friendly in our rivalry with. It's the Playbook Paris podcast, Nick.
Ha ha ha.
Oui, oui, oui. It's going to be in French. It's going to be hosted by our colleague Anthony Latier.
Perfect.
It's going to be a good listen. That's launching on June 1, running Monday through Thursday, just like we are. And you can listen to the trailer online already.
You got to tune in for that one because, of course, it's going to be the must listen ahead of the French election, which is coming up next year. And that's all going to be narrated day by day in the Paris Playbook Podcast.
That's going to be exciting. I wish I spoke French well enough to tune in.
Well, I can kind of narrate it for you or translate it for you
Can't wait.
in real time.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, folks, listen, rate, review, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't. Share this in your group chats. That's what I'd like to see. See ya, folks.